Hello, listeners, and welcome to this week's mini-series. I'm your speaker, Casey, and today I'm speaking with podcast creator Adam Dudding. Instead of preparing my own intro, I thought I would play you the trailer of Adam's incredible podcast, The Commune, which is the subject of our talk this week. For early access to full-length ad-free episodes, please visit patreon.com/thecultvault. Now, here is the trailer for The Commune and my interview with Adam Dudding from New Zealand's Stuff Podcasts.
There was a lot of things like that where you'd think, what the
From Stuff, a new 12-part documentary podcast.
He was into sex every day.
The Commune. Sex, drugs, and a guru called Bert. There are crimes, but this isn't a whodunit, it's a why-done-it.
Good God, adults agreed to this?
The Commune. Find it now on your favourite podcast platform or at stuff.co.nz/The Commune.
You've already been welcomed to Centre Point.
So hello, Adam, and welcome to the show. I'm really excited to have this conversation today after being a keen listener of your recent podcast, The Commune. Would you like to start by introducing yourself to the listeners?
Sure, why not? My name is Adam Dudding. I make podcasts for Stuff, and despite the rather strange name, it's New Zealand's biggest media group. We're a bunch of newspapers, Sunday broadsheets and daily metropolitans and local, regional, and sort of the little advertiser where you can look for somebody to do your cleaning, the full range. But now also we're a website, Stuff, and Stuff has sort of taken over the whole machine. And in the last few years, we've moved into podcasts. So I used to be a feature writer, and then I got interested in doing the same thing, but with audio, because it's fun playing with microphones.
So I do a sometimes daily, weekly sort of cult news update thing on my YouTube channel. And I sometimes do find stuff articles that I'll reference in my news around groups like Gloria Vale, for example, in that part of the world. So would your articles have been something that I might have referenced if you were still one of those feature writers?
Oh, quite possibly. So the podcast that we'll be talking about is The Commune. And as part of the rollout of that, so we had a bespoke landing page, stuff.co.nz/The Commune, which has got lovely artwork and all of the episodes themselves. But there are about 6 or 7 feature articles that, well, actually, I didn't write a word of them, actually. My name's on them, but this whole thing was done with my colleague, Eugene Bingham. So I host it, I read it, but literally every word that I'm saying and every bit of work that's in there, we worked very much hand in glove. And at the time that the stories needed to be written, these are stories to promote the podcast on the news website, I was really, really, really busy doing the final touches on the soundscaping, placing the music and editing the damn thing. And so by that time, Eugene had reached the end of what he was doing. And so he wrote all these articles in our names. But so there's sort of, there are various biographies of some of the people in the commune. But before that, and then from time to time, I still write the occasional news feature. I went to Fiji and watched some people get cataract operations with the Fred Hollows Foundation the other day. So, I'm still a regular feature writer every now and then.
How did you get into?
I sort of a combination of nepotism and kind of disorganization, really. My dad, way back in the day, was he was a journalist. A little bit sad. His first newspaper job in the 1950s was for something called the Auckland Star, which is now defunct, but through the genealogy of newspapers, it still belonged to the group that eventually became Stuff. So 70 years on, I'm working for the same place that he was, basically, or 60 years on. But anyway, so he edited literary magazines later, and so I used to help him proofread them. So I was very good with a comma by the time I was 12 or something. And then I bummed around, and in my 20s, the nepotism bit, he found me jobs as a sub-editor for various places in New Zealand, particularly a magazine called The Listener. And then I ended up in the UK at a certain point, and I really thought I should actually get a job. So I got a job, and I worked, do you know the Sunday Sun in Newcastle? I was a sub there. Oh, actually, and you won't know this probably, but are you familiar with the Shields Gazette on the Tyne?
No, I'm not.
It's in South Shields, and for 12 weeks I was a sub editor at the Shields Gazette, which was interesting. Lovely people. It was a good newspaper. It's just there wasn't a lot of news. The front page story one time was about a guy whose bins had fallen over, and he wanted the council to come and pick them up, but they wouldn't, and he was angry. So that was the South Shields Gazette. But then later I ended up in London and worked for some of the posh papers down there. So that was me, and I was a sub editor mostly. Then I came back to New Zealand. I wanted to change and got into feature editing, and then eventually belatedly started writing. So I sort of did everything a bit back to front. And then after I've been writing for a few years and still loving it, I got interested in podcasts, and then some opportunities arose and did my first podcast, which was a crime podcast called Gone Fishing. Go listen to it. It's got nothing to do with cults, but it's still kind of interesting.
Is it anything to do with a case in New Zealand around a guy getting thrown off a boat?
Close. Not thrown off a
Ooh.
boat. He is meant to have gone fishing and drowned, but some say he didn't, because he parked his car was parked at the beach, and his body was never found. But was he murdered? Well, certainly the woman that we talked to who went to jail for 15 years for having murdered him. But anyway, it's quite the case.
Oh my goodness. Do you
Gone fishing.
offer your thoughts and opinions on what you think happened in that case?
Yeah, well, with that one, what happened with that one was it wasn't my story. Obviously it's not my story, but journalistically it wasn't my story. I was looking for a podcast to do, and I sat next to a colleague, Amy Mars, and said, I want to do a podcast, but I haven't got a story that sort of justifies it, that's big enough to do a serial that just come out. So everyone wanted to do a new serial, and she said, well, I've got the story that's too big to just do as a feature, and we collaborated, and we made this thing called Gone Fishing. But yeah, it was, I can't remember what your question was. It's shocking. I should remember what
Just
questions
whether you offered your thoughts on what you think
yes,
happened.
that's right. Well, that was the thing, is that Amy was absolutely convinced that the central woman, Gail Maney, was definitely innocent, and I thought it was possible, but remained quite uncertain. And so we, in real life, we argued about it quite a lot. And then one of the producers said, "You need to turn on the microphone while you're arguing about it." So we did.
I
So,
do
yes.
like that. I do like that. I of course understand how people have to remain impartial, but I think it is interesting when you
You actually
develop
don't have to. It's not compulsory.
when you develop like a type of understanding of the host's kind of thoughts and opinions on things, I think that can add like another layer to the podcasts that you're listening to almost. And any of my listeners will know that I just hate unsolved mysteries. I hate not knowing without certainty what happened. So I don't think I could have worked on that podcast without being extremely frustrated.
That's interesting. It actually drives me nuts too, and I think that's what. Yeah, it did drive me insane a bit. I mean, there were plenty of things to keep us occupied. Like there was an incredible amount of, there were interviews to be done, and there were vast quantities of documents and court records to read through and so on. So that was fun, really, even though there's a second murder. It's a double murder. It's all pretty grim. It's some horrible things happening to people, but the process was enjoyable. But that whole thing of not being able to decide, it drove me nuts. Actually, I have just the same attitude as you. It irritates me when I don't know what happened.
And you, as you said, you can offer up what you think, might have happened, or but then someone comes back with a counter argument that you have to seriously consider, and then you're like, well, now I'm back to square one. So so that's
Well, if you
gone
want to feel
fishing,
if you want to feel annoyed, go listen to Gone Fishing because it'll drive you nuts.
and that's a Stuff podcast.
Well, that was actually a Stuff RNZ, so Radio New Zealand RNZ co-production. They're the state broadcaster, so they were all set up for in terms of kit and engineers and microphones and some real expertise around audio storytelling, and we had the story, so we collaborated.
Wow, that sounds great.
It was really cool.
So with the podcast that we're going to be focusing on today, how far from Gone Fishing up to the podcast, The Commune, was there many in between? Because this felt so professional and polished, and it just, you kind of hit the ground running with this show. Like maybe you were really experienced in this format of storytelling by this point.
Yeah, so Gone Fishing was our first, but we had, that was pretty slick sounding because we had some really great producers at RNZ sort of helping us through some of the starting points. And also both Amy and I were pretty experienced feature writers, so we knew how to tell stories, but the audio stuff we were really given huge, leg up by RNZ. After that, I did something called Out of My Mind, which was a series of interviews with people with mental health issues of one kind or another. And I was really, I don't know if you know Love and Radio, the podcast Love and Radio, Nick van der Kolk's. It's it may have a big listenership, but it's quite, it's a bit of a cult podcast really, in that it's got a very particular, unusual, rather arty left field kind of approach sonically and so on. So I was just ripping off his style, which is there, the narrator is entirely absent. All storytelling's done by the guest, and you can tell it's based off a very long interview which has then been edited down. So I did that with my one. I'd interview someone for 4 to 6 hours and turn it into half an hour. Again, just about drove me mad, and then do a really detailed soundscape, lots of music. Really, really fun, really engrossing process. And I learned a huge amount about mental health as well. But so there was that. So I learned quite a lot then. That's when I learned how to use Pro Tools. And then Eugene and I did a couple of podcasts. Well, basically, then COVID came along. Had I done any others? I think that was it. I think I helped out with some other people. I worked as a script editor on other people's podcasts for a little while. And then COVID happened. We hadn't quite had lockdown, but there were all these coronavirus podcasts popping up around the world. And I'd found Eugene was a colleague who had done a really great crime podcast of his own called The District. And I said, like on a Thursday, do you reckon we could throw together like a coronavirus podcast? And then and we spent a couple of hours figuring it out. And then on Friday we wrote a little outline. On Monday we piloted it, and Tuesday we launched it, and then we went out daily for about 4 months. It's just about killed us. And then the lockdown came 3 days later, so it was all done from this room. Well, my end was done from this room, his was done from 30 kilometers down the road. And then the pandemic got boring, so we turned that into, we sort of pivoted into an election podcast because we had a election coming up. I can't remember what happened next. Oh, and then we started on this, and it took 1.5 years, which was horrifying. Just went on and on and on.
I absolutely loved The Commune. I loved how you were able to go out and have face-to-face conversations with people who were core members, founding members of Centrepoint, which is the commune that we're going to be discussing today, and people who had questionable involvement in the commune in terms of morality and ethics and all of those things that come, all of those qualities, well, not qualities, all of those symptoms of coercion that you can find in these environments. But you must have some type of interview approach to get that candid response that you got from some of the people that you interviewed. I was so impressed and trying to take notes from how you were able to piece it all together, but also get all sides of the story to really paint the picture of what the commune was like. throughout its entire existence. So can you tell the listeners, what is Centrepoint?
Right. So cast your mind back to 1978. There's a lot of hippies about, but it's 10 years. It's 1978, not 1968. New Zealand's always a little bit behind the times, but New Zealand, like the rest of the world, had got caught up in the the 60s, really. Changes of attitudes, baby boomers with lots of money and a bit of time on their hands, and thinking, is that it? And looking for new spiritualities and new sexualities, and wearing leather jackets with tassels on them and that sort of thing, and setting up communes and alternative ways of living, and polyamory and all those sort of exciting things. So you've got your Rajneeshas, and clearly you've got your Jonestowns and your Manson family, and for good and ill, you've got all these different alternative ways of living going on. So Herbert Potter was a guy who was very interested in this stuff, and he was a pretty successful businessman. He was in his 50s. He had made quite a lot of money with a pest control business, and he got very interested in this world of slightly hippier stuff, but also therapy. And he was sort of became the central point of this little constellation of people who were interested in this stuff. And they were, doctors and social workers and nurses and teachers and builders, architects, designers, all sorts, pretty middle-class people. And they said, hey, let's form a commune. And so they did. And about 1978, they pooled some money and bought a great big piece of land in Albany, which is not far from where I'm sitting right now, on the North Shore in Auckland. And Auckland is the biggest city in New Zealand. And yeah, they just set up, got to work. The designers and architects and builders and so on started building on the property, and they built huts and put up caravans and just did their thing and developed this whole, I think they called themselves as a therapeutic community at that point in time. So their big deals were communal living, free sexuality, which basically meant a lot of people having sex with each other, really. Though quite often there were couples, and then you'd have sex with other people outside the couple. And the third thing was this huge focus on therapy, and in particular, they were into these big, like 7-day therapies where you lock yourself in a room with a bunch of people, and there's a bucket in the corner, and you moan and wail and I don't know, just generally lose your shit, and then have sex with each other at lunchtime. So and they also they were quite integrated with the wider community at that point as well. So they had, as time went by, some of them arrived with kids, but as time went by, they had kids, and so there were 60 people, and then there were 100, then there were 200, then there were 300, and the kids were going to the local schools, and some of the people in the community worked out in the community, and other people worked inside the community, and they had little businesses, gardens, and there was a weights factory where they made, gym weights. And, well, it takes 12 episodes to help tell the whole story, so I suppose I have to work out how much to compress this. But it turned out that things weren't as they should be, and the open sexuality extended to sex between adults and children, basically. And that became a matter of great concern. But even though people blew the whistle, it took a very, 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 very long time for the price to be paid for the child abuse, the sex crimes that were taking place there. Plus, there was this broader atmosphere of permissiveness and society's attitudes towards sex are bullshit, and of course, a lot of what they were talking about was true. There's hypocrisy, and people are uptight, and Victorian morals have done us no good, and the nuclear family has got lots of problems, and blah blah blah. But the solution they found contained this cancer, they just didn't look out for the kids.
when Herbert Potter, or Bert, as he's known within Centrepoint, the leader and founder of the Commune, when he founded this place, he'd been involved in a number of other intentional communities, but didn't ever feel like their answer was within these communes.
Well, he went and hung out. He went to Esalen, and I think these things he did were more by way of research, as I understand it. So the story goes, the way he told it, there was a book written inside the community in the mid-80s by one of the members, and it's quite, it's quite honest in a lot of ways, but it's it's a propaganda piece as well. Bert said that he saw an article in Playboy in 1960 something, and he was just a regular businessman with this company and employees and plenty of money and a big house at that time, and got really interested in Esalen, which is therapy, screaming, hot tubs, massages, public orgasms, all that kind of stuff. And he went there, but he didn't go there to join. He went there to see how it ticked, and he had the money and he had the time. So he headed off and spent, I think, a few months there and came back, apparently looking a bit different. He'd grown his hair longer and he was wearing crazy cloaks and stuff. So that was one. But again, so he was looking rather than living there. And then sometime after that, he went to, is it Pune, where Rajneesh was in India? You need to cut out my bear burps. Or leave them in. Up to you. This is the
Adds a
creative
bit of
control.
character.
The creative control is with you. Anyway, and he again spent several months there. And we didn't get this ourselves for our documentary, but about a year before the Commune came out, there was a TV doco called Heaven and Hell, which covers a lot of the same material as us, but it's got a rather different compass, and it's a great documentary, but it doesn't quite cover the sort of the full length that we do, because we've got the time and space with a long podcast to really cover all the ins and outs. But they had this great interview with somebody who happened to have been at Pune at the same time as Bert Potter, and he said everyone thought he was a total dick. He just wouldn't join in. He sat on the side watching and stroking his chin and sort of observing and looking a little bit superior. And he came back again. He had added to his armory of how to be a guru tricks, But again, I don't think he wasn't there to live there. He was there to look. And he came back to New Zealand and then got these various organizations and groups. And there was some communal living going on. Like there were a large number of people sort of living in and around his big house on the North Shore. And then he moved to the city, to the inner city, and there were a whole pile of people living there as well and doing therapeutic stuff. But they weren't yet doing the whole, it's a commune thing. So this is his only real intentional community in that sense.
The Esalen Institute in Los Angeles is quite notable for being part of the human potential movement and the influences that a lot of people took from that institute at the time, like Bert Potter, for example. Interesting, and I just wanted to throw this in there. Charles Manson went to spend some time there and threw all of his belief systems and so-called charisma at the people at the Esalen Institute, and they turfed him out. So they obviously weren't open to all types of ideas and rhetoric, because
you'll know this better than
basically,
me. But they're still going. It still exists, doesn't it?
it does,
Institute.
yeah, it does.
So they obviously did things that were controversial and which probably scared the horses somewhat. But they haven't all gone to jail for drug crimes or child sexual abuse. I'm sure they did some things that were on the edge. But I mean, that's one of the things. Possibly we didn't even make the point clearly enough in the podcast. It's not inevitable that a commune is going to turn into a shit show. This is one story. So it was inevitable that this commune was probably going to turn into a shit show because of the guru, the narcissist, psychopath leader, and his particular set of characteristics, which gave him the ability to draw people so far away from their ethical center. But there are loads of other communes around the country, and some of them are still going. Hippies got together and made mead with their honey and planted a bit of weed and planted a few potatoes and fixed their old cars and did their thing and maybe did a little bit of partner swapping, but it doesn't have to turn to shit.
That was about to be my next question as well, on whether you thought personally that Bert created this environment with the intention of living out his perverse nature of abusing children, or whether he was genuinely taking influences from leading research in the field, I'm saying in air quotes for all of my listeners, that led to people kind of being given not permission, but being given reasons why it's okay to have sex with children, because some of the reports that were coming out at that time, which you detailed in your podcast, kind of said, well, we've done research and it says that it's not harmful. It's actually quite good.
I actually don't know. I mean, in the end, we just didn't really have any resources that allowed us to definitively decide, because he was a con man. He was a psychopath. I think we can agree on that, or a sociopath, or whatever the difference is. Somebody who the harm of others is obviously was not terribly important to him. He was also clearly, a very talented observer and manipulator of people. I mean, one of the interviews we had was with someone who used to work for his pest company back in the day, who said he was just a fantastic man manager. He had learned man management was what he called it. I don't think we call it that anymore. And I think it was partly, some of these Dale Carnegie type things. So he was able to, in a reasonably positive way, empower people, give them the tools to train other people to be good pest exterminators, be efficient, make money, make people feel part of a group. So he had skills that you could use for good or ill. And there's no particular evidence that he was a particularly wicked person earlier in his life. There's no real evidence of that. And so I'm inclined to think that he probably authentically was really interested in that stuff. I mean, you can't invest that much time in something unless at least you find it interesting. I mean, even, mad, dodgy televangelists, I usually presume they believe in God as well as ripping people off, So I suspect Bert sort of believed his own bullshit. But also at some point, presumably, he probably got a kick out of the power and control, the power he had over people. And then he did a lot of these classic things that happen in cults. And one thing that fascinates me is, like, do people set out, it's almost putting your questions back at you, do people set out to make a cult? Do they deliberately do they go through the checklist of here's how to make people lose their sense of self-identity so you can manipulate them to your ends and or are these just such intuitive patterns of human behavior that all you need is a bunch of people, a charismatic narcissist, and it'll always end up like this? These are like well-trodden paths. But as to your real question, which is basically, was he a paedophile creating a system to enable that, or was it something that happened incidentally? I suspect it's a mix. I think he got off on lots of things. Regular vanilla sex with adult women, and then some of the more normal, exciting stuff that a middle-aged fantasy might include, of orgies or whatever. And then you've got the younger and younger. And so I think, by definition, he was a paedophile. He sexually assaulted lots of children. But I don't know if that was his driving force. And one other thing, again, from what people have said, he got a kick out of transgressing, and he got a kick out of winding people up, and the in-group out-group thing with cults. He got power also from saying, hey, look, we don't follow their stupid rules out in stupid society, we're different. And so doing something transgressive like sexually assaulting children sort of has merit in its own right as a transgressive act, and a something to to cluster around. And I think later on, once the reputation was developed that this was a place where things were happening with children, I think it became a magnet to paedophiles. But that's a distinct thing. I suspect Bert may not have been primarily a paedophile.
I think you can tell when that exact moment sort of occurs within the timeline of the podcast as well, just on how many individuals you interview that say, oh, and then more and more and more people were like, yeah, we're just doing all this horrible stuff with the children. So like, as somebody that has children yourself, and me, I think I emailed you and said, one or two episodes were really difficult to get through just because of the age of my children.
Mm.
And I think there is a moment in the podcast where you realize that that's what the commune has become.
Mm.
And you mentioned that there were a few people kind of living together up at Bert's big house, and they were yet to form what would become known as Centrepoint. And in its original genesis, it's almost like a democracy. There's a group of people that have an idea of
Right.
what they think an intentional community should look like, how they envision living as a family, as a unit. But it doesn't stay like that for very long.
No, so the central character to the whole podcast is this woman, Barry. Name's Barry, but she's a woman, and it's with an I. Makes it easy to remember. And Barry, I mean, I believe absolutely everything she told us. She's an extremely honest and reliable woman, and she gave us vast amounts of documents and so forth, which not only validated what she said, but it sometimes, showed some of the terrible things she'd done before she, got her head back on straight. But inevitably, a lot of our sense of what was going on is through Barry. And I think there are people who would have different versions of what went on. And we did talk to other people who were there, the adults, the people who are in their 70s now who founded it in the 70s. Not a lot, because quite a lot of those people, particularly the ones who remained faithful to Bert to the end, are not very interested in talking to media these days because, well, just to be frank, they're the bad guys. And some of them are unrepentant bad guys. So, we didn't really get to hear their version and explain exactly what was going on. So that's just one caveat. I totally believe Barry, but it's in terms of balance, she has a strong influence on the storytelling because she's the narrator for this early stuff. But there's that moment in the podcast, which is she relates in the podcast, where there's a guy called Bill and Bert. They're all trying to decide where to buy the commune, and Bill chooses a place, and it's not the right place for Bert, and Bert just strips off him, verbally grinds him down with this fast-talking patter, and you're useless and you're stupid, and that's all wrong. And that Barry defines that as the moment where that's that democratic sort of turning point. Bert decided he was the guru. But it is really complicated because even once they were in there and Bert was the guru and making all the significant calls, these were still, highly able, well-educated, well-resourced, well-connected people, and they were making decisions of their own. Where should we live and how should we do this and da 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 da. And yet, for whatever reason, and it seems very, very willingly, they did allow Bert to become their guru, and for him to do, because sometimes with some of the stuff some of the stuff with children happened very, very early, and quite a lot of people were, outraged. This is terrible. We can't, there's an interaction with this a very, very young child sort of having crawling over this this rather disturbed young man who just happened to be in the community, and he got an erection while the child was crawling over him, and the parent goes in and rescues the child from, it's not an assault, it's just like, okay, let's just quietly deal with this. And Bert looks up from his book and says, that's where you're going wrong. That's where children the children are screwed up by their parents' uptightness, da 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 da. So these are people whose instincts are in the right place, and they're going, this isn't good. You've got to keep an eye out for kids. And Bert's saying, nope, nope. And, there were always people leaving, but there were always more people arriving. So he managed to steer people way off where their moral compass might have taken them otherwise.
Once they eventually find the plot of land that they decide to build their intentional community, but typically, as we've heard historically with cult leaders at this point, very lazy, takes a backseat, lets everybody else get on with the hard labor, which is, again, as we've heard, quite typically 10 to 12-hour days of cutting down trees and irrigation and all that
Mm,
stuff that
mm,
comes
mm,
with
mm.
building a community.
Yeah. Well, I guess in part you're referring to our other champion, former member Robert, who I think a lot of people considered him their favourite person in the whole
Yeah, he
gig.
was definitely mine. I think I
He was
emailed you again saying I want to sit down and have freshly cooked fish with Robert.
He's an extraordinary man. So, and you can just sort of see the spirit of what the commune was and what it might have been and what it was meant to be in him. This incredibly hardworking dude who just loves the land. We put in little bits, but there was much more. The interview was really long, and he was just talking about the soil. He loved concrete, and he loved sandstone, and he loved spades, and he loved chainsaws and trees and sheep and utes. And yeah, just so full of life. But he was one of the people who ran around cutting down the trees, mustering the sheep, probably slaughtering the sheep, probably cooking the sheep, doing the piping, doing the plumbing, doing the gravel on the road, while he's surrounded by, yeah, as you say, other people who are there for a rather more hippie-ish experience, and were just, as he put it, lying around looking beautiful. And Bert was one of those. But I mean, this happens. I don't know if it happened. I know a lot less about cults than you do, but we interviewed this fantastic guy, Nick Bollinger, who's just written a book about New Zealand's counterculture, and so that includes through this sort of little bit before that period. But we interviewed him. He talked about communes in general, and so there's communes rather than cults. But yeah, people who think that you can kind of set up and just live off the land, but it turns out living off the land's really hard. You've got to plant, and you got to weed, and you got to fertilize, and it's generally difficult. But yeah, Bert always thought he knew everything about everything. When they had their public births in the big giant kitchen dining room area, with the whole community watching. And this was the era of rampant home births, and that's all fine. But yeah, home birth of 60 people watching is kind of interesting. But Bert would be right in there, sort of calling the shots, telling her when to breathe, and all that sort of stuff. And he just didn't have a fucking clue. He didn't know anything really. He had extraordinary self-confidence, and so yeah, one of the midwives told Robert at one point that she'd had to basically just tell Bert to go away because he was going to screw up this birth, and she was the one with the midwife certificate, and he wasn't. But I guess it takes a particular kind of ego to think that you're a guru in the first place. So I don't think we should be surprised that he overrated himself on his ability to birth children and cut down trees and plan things.
Yeah.
I suspect he was actually reasonably competent, but he was also somewhat overconfident.
I do feel like he had this really great ability to implement himself into every part of everything that was happening at the commune, but then not very actively. So everyone always was aware of his presence.
Yes.
And, he would tell people how things should be done, but never show people how things should be done. That's the kind of the gist that I got.
I think that's probably pretty likely. Yeah.
So when you talk to Barry, and this was fantastic. This is similar to what somebody, an investigative journalist named Siren Warner, who I'm working closely with. He is looking into a group called The Body, who originated out of Nikiski, Alaska. And for posterity, the leader wanted everything recorded, which now has, obviously, it's not working in the leader's favor. It's working in Siren's favor because he's collecting court documents. And he
Nothing
is
like a good
finding
paper, but a document.
he's
Love them.
finding interviews, and he's finding recordings of things that were happening in real time in the commune in Nikiski, similar to what Barry's job role was at Centrepoint.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so the way she put it is, some people were just lying around looking beautiful. Other people got on with trying to make the place work economically. Her husband, I just realized I can't remember, but anyway, her partner at the time was a potter, and he managed to persuade various people to help him build this huge pottery. And also 1970s pottery was very trendy. And so that was quite a significant, economic unit of Centrepoint. She really wasn't into making pottery, and she wasn't into a lot of the other things you meant to do, and she felt a little bit on the outer, but she was a reader and a writer. And so she started a little newsletter, and it was basically a propaganda newsletter, which originally started as not much more than 8 pages of folded paper, with she got a tape recorder out and recorded Bert's rambling guru garbage on a Saturday, where he'd just talk about this, that, and the other, and some idea he had and why it was fine to have sex with children. And she'd record it and turn it into, was it Bert Said or Bert? I think it was Bert's Talk, because Bert Said was another thing. Bert Said is the magic words you'd use if you want anything to happen. Bert said we should build this here, or Bert said I should have this something, or Bert said you should do this for me, and then you'd get what you wanted. Anyway, so yeah, she made these tapes to feed the content to her, what became, I think, was a monthly magazine, and it got thicker and thicker and more glossy, and they produced it with better and better fonts and colors and photography, and lots of creative people in there, lots of really great photos in there. And she started interviewing people, and yeah, it is a fantastic document in 2 ways. One, it was this timeline. You could just see who was there and who left and who arrived and what they're up to, and information about who'd got married and which children had arrived and so on. So it was this incredible resource for just putting together the timeline. But also because she had recorded these speeches, and there were hundreds, but I'm just wondering if they're still here. I may not have returned the tapes to Barry. Have I returned them? Because I might go and see if they're in that box and I can rattle them for you. Anyway, she had kept around about 30 of these cassettes. So it's, C60s and C90s, and, for a 1970s kid like me, it was quite nostalgic just looking through all these old cassettes, actually. And digitizing them took a while, because some of them I had to actually perform open heart surgery on the tape because they got so sticky. So I had to pull it apart and take out the spools and transfer it into a clean shell and screw it back up and loosen the wires and shake it and try and get it moving, and then borrowed about 5 different tape decks till I could find one that was at the right speed and which didn't, could rewind properly. Everyone's got a tape deck in their garage, but they're all broken. Just ask your dad. I'm sure he's got, a cassette player somewhere. Anyway, so we had these hours and hours of Bert rambling. But in the rambling, there's just so much. There's so much material. Some of it was facts, but where it wasn't facts, it was just texture and tone, storytelling-wise, being able to go. So I just listened to the whole podcast for the first time in a long time this last weekend, so I'd be vaguely prepared for you. And it fell to poor old Eugene. I digitized the audio, and then he put them through a transcription software. But because the tapes were a bit damaged and because of the New Zealand accent in an American program, the transcribing wasn't super great. And then Eugene's horrible torment of a task was to spend many weeks just tidying up the transcripts and parsing them, looking for the good stuff, trying to work out what was what. But near the end of, it's around about episode 11 or 12, there's this bit where we're just trying to say Bert's life. Bert was this, Bert was that, he was like that, it was like this. And each piece is sort of demonstrated with this tiny snatch quote from Bert talking. And when I was hearing that, I mean, you're not meant to pat yourself on the back for something you've done, but it's Eugene's work, so I don't feel so bad about it. But I was thinking, oh my God, I've forgotten, A, how much work this was, but B, how much there was to work with. You know, it was basically, it's like Barry handed us a paint box with 4,000 colours in it, and we were just able to use them wherever we needed them for storytelling.
And that, I think, is what is particularly fantastic about this podcast, was the amount of resources that you were able to put into it, from first person testimony from those that were there from the beginning, from the children that grew up there, from people that observed Centrepoint from the outside and would see strange things going on, or you know, you would say, oh, there's one of those Centrepoint people, because of the way that they would act or dress, you know, out in the wider public. That down to everything that Barry had collected and given over to you to include, and the way that you were able to put it all together just made such an incredible podcast. And it shot up to the charts, and it was at number one all over the place for a really long time.
Yeah, no, we were very happy with the response. We always hoped that it might have some kind of international cut through. I mean, the story of Centrepoint has been told in New Zealand quite a few times. I don't think quite at this length, at quite this level of detail, but over the years, you know, it was scandalous. First, it was, you know, in 1981 there was a big TV documentary which was just that it was kind of what are these weirdos doing, and that was a pretty substantial piece. But that was really early. There were no public rumors at that point about any misbehavior. It was just, wow, they're having babies in front of 60 people. Wow, they're running around in the nude, hitting each other with pillows. Or they sleep in these shared dormitory things, and everyone's having sex with each other. But yeah, so at the various times there have been quite substantial tellings of it. But we were aware that apart from maybe a little bit of awareness in Australia, there was probably little to no international awareness of the existence of this place. And we just thought there's a universality of themes and behaviors, and it's you know, it's of the zeitgeist, you know, this kind of course it's still going on now, but the particular flavor of it, there were things a bit like this in, you know, Washington State and India and Wales, and there's probably 5 of them in Cornwall, I don't know, but you know, they're all over the place. The whole world does the same stupid things at the same time. It's just that's the joy of globalism. So we figured people abroad might be interested, which is why when there's a scene where someone talks about having tea and bickies, we drop in a brief translation for North Americans so that they know that it is cookies. So yeah, we sort of had an eye to that. So we were trying to serve the New Zealand audience first, but hoping that it would be heard abroad. And I've got confused now because we switched platforms. Like our podcast hoster has changed, and so it's hard to track the numbers. But I think we've had quite a lot more listens outside of New Zealand now than in New Zealand. Huge, really big listenership in Australia, pretty substantial in the UK, quite, you know, pretty substantial in America. Possibly more than in America than in New Zealand, but America's awfully big, so no, it never made number 1 in America.
That is the end of part 1 of this mini-series on the Commune. In part 2, we will discuss more of Adam's podcasting journey and Bert Potter's Centrepoint. To find Adam's work, follow the link in the episode description or search for the Commune across your podcast player. To get in touch with me, you can find me at cultvaultpodcast@gmail.com or follow me on Twitter and Instagram at cultvaultpod. I'm your speaker Casey, host of the Cult Vault podcast.